All right. Here we go. Jocko and Leif. Explain how you first met and worked together. And then the second part is, how do you stay so disciplined every day? So, Leif, meeting Jocko, good times. How's that?
We touched on this a little bit in podcast 11, but it was a good time. I checked into SEAL Team 3 back in the spring of 2005, and I was taking over as the platoon commander for Charlie Platoon, and I see the name on the board, Jocko, and I already kind of heard his name around. People kind of knew who he was, but I didn't know much about Jocko. I was like, but our chief, Tony, who we've also talked about, who was just a complete badass, amazing warrior, incredible combat leader, and he said, "Hey, Jocko's good to go." He's like, "Jocko's who you want." I was like, "Right on. I'm looking forward to meeting Jocko." And at this time, Jocko was the admiral's aide, so I think you were still busy, kind of running around and trying to turn over those duties there. Very busy job, difficult job, but an important job certainly. And so when Jocko finally showed up to the team, the first time I remember seeing him was we had a morning formation. So we all go to our morning meeting, and then we stand in formation out back of the team. And everyone musters up, and I just remember looking at Jocko, and he had zero smile on his face, just a scowl, no smile whatsoever. In fact, I don't think you smile for the first 2 months.
Yeah, I have a 2-month moratorium when I meet people for smiling.
And so he just came up to us, and he just looked at us and said, "I'm Jocko," and just staring through us like he wanted to murder us, and shaking our hand. It was me, and then our other the Delta Platoon commander, and we knew each other well. Me and the Delta Platoon commander, and we were like looking at each other, and he's like, he looks at me, he's like, "Jocko hates me. I can already tell it." Yeah.
Jocko hates everybody.
Yeah. But what I didn't realize later, until after we worked together, and he gave me a copy of the book About Face, which we've talked about you've talked about many times on the podcast, and it's a tremendously influential book. I know on you, certainly on me, and on our entire generation. About Face by Colonel David Hackworth. I realized that that's what he did when he checked in and took over his unit, which he renamed the Hardcore, and actually, he said, "I didn't smile at anybody for it was 6 weeks or something like the first couple months he was there."
I like to be a little bit harder than Hackworth, so I go 2 months.
Wait, did you get it from Hackworth, or was that was your thing anyway?
I don't remember. I probably did. I ripped off so much stuff from Hackworth. I definitely ripped off, like, we renamed the task unit, which was called Bravo. We renamed it Bruiser. That complete rip off from Hackworth. So, but I know what?
It worked. It worked.
Yeah. I always have. I mean, when you meet me, I'm going to be standoffish. I'm not a big, I don't open. I'm just not generally like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, you did me like that.
Yeah.
Real cool. All nuts.
He probably didn't smile for the first 2 years that he knew you. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, the tough thing is when you take over a position like that in the SEAL teams, and Leif, you know this, you don't know who you're getting. You don't know anything about them. You have guys that you are going to have to put trust and faith in to lead guys in combat, and it's that's the way I saw it, and I knew that with you guys were the platoon commanders. You guys were going to be on the battlefield every day. You guys were going to be leading guys in combat. There was going to be so much pressure on you guys. There was going to be violence. There was going to be war, and so I wanted to, and there was a chance you were going to get fired. I didn't want to be friends with you yet. I wanted to make sure you made it through certain wickets. And then, obviously, the more I got to know you, and actually, there was, at this time, I wasn't, I guess the word is, I wasn't as mature as I am right now. So I was talking to one of the senior officers at the team, and they were thinking about maybe switching guys around or moving the platoons around. And now at this point, I had gotten to know you guys, you and the Delta Platoon commander, and realized that you guys were exactly who I wanted to be with me in combat. Exactly the type of guys that I knew would never back down, would go forward, and would kick ass. And I knew that. But this guy says to me, he says, hey, we're thinking about maybe moving some of the platoon commanders or blah, 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 blah. And I said, no, the 2 guys I got are the 2 guys I'm keeping. And they're like, well, do they have the qualities that you want, and I said, they have the 2 qualities. He said the qualities. I said, I only need 2 qualities. They need to be able to listen, which means they're humble, and they need to be tough. And that's what those guys are. Because I dished out all kinds of crap on these guys, and they always just took it.
We wouldn't have lasted long because we were all training jiu-jitsu at 0500 every morning.
That's how we roll.
And we had an awesome task unit, and Jocko mentored and trained us, and I'm sure he was frustrated with our performance initially because he had a lot more experience than me or Delta Platoon Commander, and yet he spent the time to train and mentor us and get us to where we needed to be. And by the time we deployed, to the battlefield in Ramadi, he unleashed us on the battlefield to lead our platoons and even underneath us within the platoon, our assistant platoon commanders and our platoon chief and our leading petty officer. I mean, our senior leaders within that, they were out leading their own elements on the battlefield. And so he had to have tremendous faith and trust in those guys, and we certainly built that. And it was all certainly due to Jocko's leadership, to you, Bruiser, thanks to Colonel David Hackworth.
Yeah, and everybody should know that it's Leif and I are the mouthpieces right now for a bunch of badass guys that all stepped up. And when we were going through training, crushing it. When we went overseas, crushed it. We're two people from a big unit, and all those guys, were just getting after it. And we put them all. We didn't. It's we were just talking about firing people. We fired people from Task Unit Bruiser that didn't make the cut. And we tried. We did the things we were supposed to do. We mentored them. We helped them along. And at the end of the day, they weren't ready. And so we got rid of them. So when we went overseas, we were ready to rock.
We knew we could count on everybody.
Yep.
No doubt.
Yep.
And I think that's something that people, miss. And we talk about that all the time, that, what makes a team, the biggest lesson we brought back from Ramadi was that leadership is the most important thing on the battlefield. Leaders at every level. And so, why we had an extraordinary task unit was because we had those leaders at every level that stepped up. Not just me, not just Jocko, our squad leaders in charge of 8 guys, our fire team leaders in charge of 4 guys, the 2-man shooter pair, down to the frontline trooper who just stepped up, owned his piece of the mission and led and got after it.
Yeah. And when you think about, actually, as I'm sitting here thinking about, because I really haven't thought about this too much, about the process of going from, I don't know these 2 guys, I don't trust these 2 guys. That's the main piece of it, right? I don't trust these 2 guys because I don't know them. And so how do you build that trust? And somebody asked me that the other day, and it's a really good point of how do you build trust with people. And the best way, I think, to build trust is to give trust. So I said, I'd look at Leif and say, hey, you run this operation. You run this training operation. I trust that you can do it. Now, when I give him that trust, he's looking at me thinking to himself, hey, this guy trusts me. This guy. So we're building the trust. Whereas if I say, Leif, I'll run this, you just follow me. You just get in the back seat. You just step aside. That's where we're not building trust. And if we went on deployment, if I had acted like that whole deployment, we got on deployment, I wouldn't have had built any trust. And I'll tell you one more thing. As I was sitting here thinking, we did everything together. I mean,
no doubt.
We ate dinner, we worked out, we did jiu-jitsu. This was you, me, the other platoon command, the Delta platoon commander. We did everything together. I mean, you guys lived together. And we all lived in the same neighborhood. We surfed together. We lifted together. Everything was together. We debriefed together. And that is how you get this bond and this massive amount of trust where I look at you and know I don't have to say a word. You know the deal. I know the deal. And we go forward.
One thing I was just thinking about, too, is this is something that I think you brought to the table. I mean, as you were training us and mentoring us and spending time with us and building that trust as we were going through all this training to get ready for combat deployment. If you come in and say, you talked about before, like, I'm going to coach you, I'm going to mentor you, obviously that makes people like, but when you actually say, when you said to me, like, Leif, you got this, or like, hey, run this. And then I'm put in a situation where I know Jocko's got a bunch of experience in this, this particular direct action, raids. He just come back from Iraq and had a bunch of experience. I didn't have any experience in that. I'd led a few sniper operations, but that was it. And I didn't done any, direct action raids like that. So here we are I'm getting thrust into it. I'm in charge. I got to make some calls. It's humbling. So what does that make me do? It makes me be like, hey, Jocko, what do you think about this? Hey, here's kind of what I'm thinking here. What do you think? So it opens up the conversation of like, hey, I'm looking for mentorship. I'm looking for training rather than I got it all figured out. So even had I thought that initially, at that point when you don't have experience, you don't even know what you don't know. Yeah. So when you put people in a situation that it's beyond their comfort zone, it's outside of their real knowledge base, then they're looking to you for help. They're looking to you for guidance.
That's a good point. And actually somebody we were working with a company the other day on the East Coast, and we were going through something, and you were describing me, quote unquote, mentoring you. And again, I hate to use that word, but when you described it, you said, hey, Jocko asked me this, and then he asked me this, and then he asked me this. And what I was doing was saying, hey, Leif, why are you doing that right there? And Leif said, well, this is what I thought. And I said, okay, well, what would you do then if this happened? And Leif said, oh, that's a good point. And so instead of me saying, Leif, don't do that, do this right here. I didn't do that. I was asking him questions and letting him find the answer. And also, the other point of this, for real, is I wasn't just asking him the question like so that I could guide him down the perfect path. I'm legitimately asking him like, why are you doing that right there? Because maybe he's got an idea in his head that could be positive.
I can talk through that example because that was in the kill house.
Yeah,
we're working through the kill house, and for those that don't know who the kill house is, you've got rooms and hallways in a building, and oftentimes it's ballistic walls, so we can shoot live fire in there. Same thing SWAT teams use, or any military in the world. But it's you work on your close quarter combat skills, or CQC, where you enter doorways and you're working together as a team, clearing these halls and rooms and moving through a target building in a training environment. And often they can change them and move the hallways around or change doorways, so it mixes it up every time. You can't really get used to doing it one way or the other, and so I'd been told as an officer my job was to stand in the back and just take the report. So that's what I did. And
the report being how many people have been shot, how many hostages have been captured, how many SEALs have been wounded. That's
exactly
the report.
I've got the little quarterback sleeve on my arm with a grease pencil, and I'm just standing in the back doing that. And the question Jocko asked me was, hey, Leif, he literally asked, it wasn't condescending. It was, the tone really mattered. And he said, well, why are you in the back? And he was very curious about why I was in the back. What was my tactical reasoning for that? And I looked at him and I was like, that's what I was told to do. And someone who had told me that didn't really have any real experience on a real battlefield had said, well, you're an officer, you just stand in the back. And so I thought, I'm going to aggressively do that. That's what I'm going to do. And that's where I was.
Aggressively stand in the back.
And I'm a pretty default aggressive leader. And I was like, hey, if my job is to stand in the back and take this report, I'm going to do it better than anybody. Watch this. And when Jocko asked me that, he's like, well, why are you in the back? And I was like, because that's where I thought I was supposed to be. And then he asked me another question. It was, well, do you know what's going on up in the front of the train right now? I've got 15 guys spread out through the building. They're in different rooms and stuff. And I was like, I have no idea what's going on in the train up front. And so then the follow-on question from him was like, well, how can you lead these? How can you lead this team? How can you be the command and control for your team if you don't know what's going on up front? And I was like, it was just light bulb moment go off. Like I have to be in a position where I know where I need to be. And it showed me that I was not only was I wrong in where I was, but I was failing as a leader and failing my team if I couldn't actually lead them and know what's going on. So the proper position for me was forward, somewhere in the middle generally, and I could move around. I didn't want to get so far forward that I'm getting sucked into every room clearance or getting in a gunfight, in the hallway, because I got to be able to stand back and see what's going on, but not so far in the back that I don't know what's going on up front. So he never needed to tell me that again. It was I knew where I needed to be. I understood that it made sense to me, and I think if you want to that's a great example of being able to successfully mentor your people so they understand, to ask them those questions in a way that's meaningful. It's not condescending. It's not, I know everything. Why are you doing that? But or don't do this. But actually asking me the questions, and I didn't have a legitimate answer. Light bulb goes off. Nobody ever needs to tell me that again.
Yeah, I feel like that's like such a critical component. The tone, how you can say the same exact question, but you say it in all these different tones. So like what were you? You know how you always say this. Like, what were you thinking there on that thing or that when that went down, as opposed to, what were you thinking? Like that kind of thing. That's common. Yeah. What were you thinking? Like, you're so dumb.
And I think the factor is that I truly recognize that I could be learning something, and there might be something I don't see. And I'll tell you what, Leif talked about this earlier, man. Combat is humbling. And I've been in situations, combat, where I did not have control. Yeah. And I did not do good. And I look at those situations, and I don't know if that's going to happen again in whatever situation. So my mind is not sitting there saying I know everything, because I know I don't. Yeah. So when I'm asking those questions, I am legitimately asking you the question, hey, Echo, what were you thinking when you spliced this thing together? Or what were you thinking when you posted this thing on that video? What's the purpose of that? And I actually want to know. So that's why I'm not saying, Echo, why the hell did you post that? You know what I mean? It's I genuinely am not overconfident and don't think I know everything.
And that was one of the biggest lessons learned. In addition to this, leadership is the most important thing on the battlefield. One of the other big lessons learned was humility. And that, at that time, I had deployed to Iraq before, so I was a one platoon wonder.
One cruise wonder.
Exactly. And
one pump chump.
It's and you really feel that happens when you have, I've deployed or I've been overseas and I've done a few combat operations, you get that under your belt, and yet you don't even realize what it feels like to be overwhelmed, to have things that are out of your control, to have the enemy flank you or do something that you hadn't foreseen. And I think those just sustained combat operations for almost 7 months in Ramadi, just day in and day out of intense gun battles, was something that it was humbling. And I think that was one of the biggest lessons learned we were able to come back and pass on to others, was just, wow, if you think you got it figured out, you haven't really done anything real.
Yeah, and the other thing that happens, and this is actually to exactly to your point. Somebody goes overseas and they do some combat operations and they don't get challenged, they don't get tested truly, and it actually falsely increases their confidence. And we see this in the business world too. Like you have a company that came out of the gate and that they just timed things right, they were ahead of the curve, and all of a sudden they're doing fantastic and they think they can make no mistakes. And they're not humble. So their success actually makes them get arrogant. And I mean, it's real obvious. I mean, look at Ronda Rousey, right? Ronda Rousey, she thought, hey, I'm good to go. I'm going to beat all these people. And that arrogance will bite you. And so I think we saw that in the SEAL teams, where guys would go overseas, do a quote unquote combat deployment. They'd get some experience, but it wasn't like hardcore sustained combat operations. And so that actually, it would be a negative. It'd almost be better not to have any experience. Almost. It's probably better to have some experience. But you definitely, so my point is, whether you're in combat, whether you're going into combat, whether you've been in combat, whether you're in business, whether you're in a sport, just because you've had some success, don't start cutting corners. Don't get arrogant. I mean, this is common sense stuff, but we still see it all the time.
Yeah, when you're in the mix, you're just compelled to do it.
Like, I'm winning.
Yeah,
I don't need to train any harder. I don't need to train any harder. I'm good to go.
It's like that guy running the mile. The guy who's running the mile, right? He's beating everyone. He's winning. But then you got the guy who's had some adversity through the 4 laps, and at the end, he's turning it on. And the guy who ran the mile, he's like, oh, I'm cruising. And the guy passes him. Same thing.
I think that's why it's always easy to be the underdog, because it's you can just take advantage of overconfidence, of arrogance, of someone who just doesn't think.
Yeah, and it's like what you were saying. Like, I'd gone to Iraq. We'd done a bunch of operations, but I'll tell you, in my mind, I didn't feel like I had been tested. I knew a lot. I felt like, hey, we still got to be. That's why we always thought worst case scenario. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? How bad can this get? That's what I was always looking at and still look at. And when we were running training, when I was running training, when you were running training, we were always looking at that. I want the training to be harder than combat. So keep your ego in check, people.
And we talk to leaders about that all the time. I just had a conversation with a leader not too long ago about how he's telling me everything's going good. He's implemented the stuff we talked about. He's rock and rolling with these principles. His team's going great. I'm like, okay, well, where can it go bad? Where can it go bad? What did you miss? What risk did you are you not taking the proper steps? What's the worst case scenario that can happen? I think good leaders are going to be doing that all the time. Never going to be satisfied. Always thinking, what did I miss? There's always those little butterflies there. And I think when you're going out on an op and thinking, I got it all figured out, what bad could possibly happen? We're going to crush the enemy.
Watch out.
It's going to go bad for you.
All right. Moving on to the next question.
I'll tell you though, what's easy about being the underdog is that not much is expected out of you. So even if you fail it, everyone's like, whatever, it doesn't throw up any kind of red flag, doesn't move the needle. But when you do good, it moves the needle because no one expects much out of you.
Yep, being the underdog is the easier position. Less pressure.
Yeah, it can be seen that way, yeah.
For sure.